Optimal Organization and Governance of Online Programs. My name is Dave Kleinfelter. I'm the Chief Academic Officer here at the Learning House. Learning House is a organization that works with colleges and universities throughout the country to assist them in putting online programs in place for their students. And the session today is a favorite topic of mine. There are ways to organize for online programs that will facilitate the growth and development of quality programs. And there's other ways to organize that go much slower and create a lot more difficulty, I think, for the people managing the programs. So when we talk about optimal organization, I want to be clear to folks that this organizational structure and set of governance issues that we're going to go through today are really in place, or the concept is that we can help you if you want to grow your programs online substantially. The goal here is not to talk about hundreds of students, but thousands of students, and not to take 5 or 6 years to develop your programs, but much shorter time frame. So when we talk about optimal organization, those are the kinds of results that we're focusing on. I also want to emphasize that this is a session where your participation is valued and appreciated. So if you have comments or questions, feel free to share those at any time using the chat feature, and I'll pause in the presentation and be glad to respond. It's not the easiest kind of dialogue, but it does help. And if you have questions and comments, don't hesitate to type them in, and we'll respond to them. Also, the plan is to end the presentation in 1 hour from now, but then I'll stay on for 30 minutes after that. If you have questions and other topics that you want to pursue, we'll take the time after the presentation to do that. So if that's of interest, know that that's going to be coming up at the end of the hour here. So when we think about online programs, a little bit of background and history. This is a picture from Wild West days when we had the great land rushes where the federal government was giving away property, and they would have these kind of like a race where people would line up, and then you could go into this territory and stake your claim, and the first one there was able to get the prize land or the choice pieces of property. In some ways, this is what's happened in higher education in the past decade, and I think we're in the midst of this even now. The first great land rush in higher ed really occurred between 2000 and 2010, and it was dominated primarily by for-profit universities like the University of Phoenix and DeVry and Kaplan and Career Ed that saw the need for flexible online programs that would serve adults who wanted to go back to college and needed that college degree, but were not able to attend traditional universities with their rigid class structures and physical locations. John Sperling, the person that founded University of Phoenix, was really the kind of the genius that saw the potential there. There were estimates that over 60 million adults were in the U.S. population that needed and wanted degrees. And so these institutions developed online programs and kind of led the land rush, or led the rush to claim that territory and offer these programs. The Learning House partnered with Islanian Market Research this past spring and did a survey of online college students. And here's one of the pieces of data that came out of that survey. In this study, we surveyed 1,500 people who were currently enrolled in fully online college degree programs, or had just graduated within the last 12 months, or were definitely planning to enroll within 12 months. So these were people that were right in the middle of it. And this is the breakout by public, not-for-profit, private, not-for-profit, and the for-profit institutions. The for-profit institutions enroll about 12% of the college students in America today, and yet they had 35% of this sample in the online population. So they've really exceeded or outsized in terms of their position in the online marketplace. And it's this kind of land rush phenomenon that I was talking about that's resulted in these kind of numbers. They were early and first to develop online programs. There were a few nonprofit institutions over the past 10 years that have been aggressive in this space as well. But primarily the for-profits led that charge, so to speak. Even though there's more students overall in the nonprofit sector, most of these programs are small. They're distributed across a large number of institutions, and they haven't seen that kind of outsized representation. Well, what we're seeing right now is kind of a second round of this land rush that's going on. And I think that it's time for the nonprofit institutions to really step up and claim some of this space. In fact, what we're seeing in the last few years is a decline in the for-profit institution enrollment. And at first, people thought that decline was due to the new regulations that came out from the U.S. Department of Education. But I think that's not the primary driver here. The primary driver, as one analyst described it, is that the sleeping bear has awoken. And the sleeping bear is the nonprofit sector moving into offering online degrees as it's become more acceptable and a more important part of institutional strategy. And so what's happening is the nonprofit institutions are taking market share away from those for-profits. And this next slide is part of the reason why that is happening. This is the second question that we asked in that market research study of the 1,500 online students. And these are the factors that they look at and that kind of drives their decision in choosing which institution they will attend. Notice the first and the third have to do with reputation or recognition in your field. They want to attend an institution that's reputable. And another question that we asked in this survey was how far away is the institution from where you live? And it was kind of a surprising finding to discover that 80% of these fully online students are enrolled in an institution within 100 miles of where they live. So they really have a regional or a local focus even when they go online. And I think a lot of that explains this response about reputation or recognized in their field. Because there's a local institution that's been there for many, many years, it has brick and mortar buildings, and it's known within that region, people feel good about attending it. And the second factor here, if you look at number 2 down, is tuition and fees. So after reputation, price is very important to these students. And the for-profits are really at a disadvantage and kind of hampered because of what's known as the 90-10 rule. The 90-10 rule only applies to for-profit institutions. It says that at least 10% of their income has to come from non-Title IV sources. So to stay in compliance with the 90-10 rules, in effect what the for-profit institutions have to do is keep their tuition elevated so that students have to pay at least a portion of their tuition out of pocket so that at least 10% of the income is from non-Title IV sources. So nonprofit institutions, both public and private, have a huge advantage here where they can drop their price and undercut, so to speak, the for-profit institutions. So reputation and price are key factors, and on both of these factors, the nonprofit sector can really do well in comparison. And so the result is, I think the second land rush is underway right now in U.S. higher education. But it's not the same kind of land rush we saw between 2000 and 2010, where these large national institutions were kind of rushing into this space. Now it's local. And you think about these circles, they don't quite represent a 100-mile radius. But think of the U.S. As many, many regions, 100, 200 miles in circumference. And the real question is who will dominate the online space for adult learners within each of those regions. Very few institutions are going to be nationally known and nationally draw students, but within your region they will. And that notion of reputation with a physical campus that people read about in the newspaper and drive by occasionally is what's driving part of that. So I think the next phase that we're in right now is who's going to claim that space. And the nonprofits have a distinct advantage here. Know, too, that it's not just a matter of offering a program and you're going to get all these students. You still have to compete with the for-profit sector. They're out there advertising or recruiting students on a daily basis, and with other nonprofit institutions within that region. So there'll be continued effort to build a quality program and deliver it in an effective way. So that's what we're going to get into now in this presentation, is how to organize yourself to develop good programs, to move rapidly, and to be able to claim that territory in the region roundabout where your institution is. The question is, do you want to ride a bicycle, or do you want to ride a thoroughbred racehorse and get there? And so here's what I think is a kind of organizational structure that will let you ride the racehorse. It's helpful to think about this when you think about organizational structure in terms of branch campuses. Most of us have some experience, or we know what branch campuses are like. Many of the institutions that we work with here at the Learning House have off-site locations where they deliver programs. In some cases, the partners that we work with have 10 or 15 of these off-campus sites or locations. And the accrediting bodies call these, they have different terminology to name these. Some call them instructional sites or instructional locations. Some use the phrase branch campus. And usually a branch campus is where a full degree program is offered, where the students would never have to go to the main campus, and a full array of support services is available. So think of a branch campus in that context. Think of one that maybe has 10 or 15 or 20 full degree programs offered at that location, a full array of faculty and other support services where students never have to go to the main campus. It's a good analogy, and it's a good way to think about how you would optimally organize for online programs. And think of the online programs now as just another branch campus or another campus of the university. And what we want to do is for these this online campus, this new kind of version of the institution, to grow. In some cases, we have partners that we work with here at the Learning House where the online enrollments are quite a bit larger than the enrollments back at the main campus. It's really the dominant part of the university or the college, so to speak. That's the goal that's out there and the potential. So think about a campus even that's maybe 500 miles away from the main campus, a long ways away where you're not going to drive back and forth. But you have to build the structure, the infrastructure, deliver the services there. So you would typically hire faculty in that area, hire other support staff. You would do marketing and enrollment management focused on that geographic territory and not the territory back where the main campus is. Well, online is very similar in that sense. It's different kind of faculty, different kind of marketing and enrollment management, different kind of students that you're going to serve. Although the piece that you keep in common is the degree. It's still a degree from your institution. It's the same curriculum, the same outcomes, and the same degree at graduation. But you're structured and organized differently to deliver that degree in two different locations or two different delivery modes. Here's an example of a branch campus like that. Some of you may know or even have visited the Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. This branch campus started back in the early part of the 20th century with both of these universities offering a few classes and a few programs in Indianapolis. They're both located 100 miles or so away from the city. Over time, those programs grew. They merged together to have a common facility at one point in the development there where they had a building where both Purdue and Indiana offered programs. As it grew and grew, came to have its own chancellor, its own campus, has its own athletic teams now. They play Division I sports. It's still, quote, managed officially by Indiana University, but 30,000 students in this kind of a pretty extensive branch campus. So think of a campus like IUPUI that's pretty well developed and even similar, if not bigger in size than the home campus. Here's another example. Grand Canyon University is located in Phoenix, Arizona. Grand Canyon just announced a few months ago that they bought a high school campus in Massachusetts. They're going to turn it into a branch campus of Grand Canyon University, and they expect to have about 5,000 students in Massachusetts at that location within a few years. So think about main campus in Phoenix, branch campus with 5,000 students in Massachusetts. All the services and functions are going to have to be replicated and duplicated there. There'll be some things that will come from Arizona, but many of those basic functions will be provided on site there in Massachusetts. So keep in mind this concept of branch campuses as you think about the organizational structure. And let's talk now about some of the key parts of that structure. First of all is leadership. When you build online programs, for them to really function well, they need a dedicated leader whose sole responsibility is building and developing online programs and managing them. I think that person should have a title of something like associate provost or assistant provost and report directly to the provost. Their title, I think, should be bigger than that of the other folks that typically report to the provost, the deans of various schools and colleges, because it needs to signify that they have broader responsibility than an individual dean does. Think about a place like IUPUI. It has its own chancellor and its own board. So at some point, if your online programs get big enough and become a major part of the institution, you may even elevate that associate provost for the online campus up and have two provosts, both reporting directly to the president. But this person needs to have academic credentials, just like a provost would. They need to be able to supervise faculty and academic programs and have the authority and the kind of unofficial authority to work directly with deans and other program heads across the campus and be charged with the responsibility of growing and developing and managing those online programs. So leadership is critical. And obviously, along with that, as the programs grow, they'll have dedicated staff and their own staff and some of these key functions. Let's look at the departments then, or the services, the functions that would be campus-specific versus those that would be shared or at the university level. There are a few things, if you look at the right-hand side of this chart, that need to be done kind of separately. Marketing is the first one. It's a different kind of marketing, a different skill set, and a different set of channels and avenues to reach online students or potential online students than it is to market the institution to potential residential students that would come to the home campus. And so it's important you have dedicated people with the talent and the ability and the skills to market to that audience versus the traditional audience. Enrollment management is even more important. Adult students don't go through the same process to go to an online program that an 18-year-old does to come to the main campus. And so the skill set, again, and the processes you use to enroll those people are so different that you ought to have dedicated people doing the online enrollment management with appropriate leadership and tools to go with that. Advising is maybe not the right word to put here, but a better replacement would be student life. In the online programs, advising is a key function where people work with the students as needed to help them solve whatever problems they have, whether it's a financial aid problem, a course registration problem, or even personal issues. Typically, online programs provide support staff. Oftentimes, they're called advisors. Here at Learning House, we call them success coaches that work with those students. On a campus, the equivalent would be the whole residence life staff, counseling centers, et cetera, et cetera. So very different functions to support those students. The help desk is something that's typically specific for the online students where you don't need the same kind of service for the campus-based students or the main campus students. Faculty supervision is an area that I think has some controversy around it, but it's critical that when you think about the faculty that are going to teach in online programs, that they are appropriately supervised. So along with the head of the online programs, as the programs grow and as you add new programs in different disciplines, it's important to have a coordinator or even a chairperson for the online program that would supervise the faculty teaching those online classes. As our institutions that we work with grow and develop their programs, they add full-time faculty that just teach in the online programs, and they have many adjunct or part-time people that teach in those online programs. So it's important to have the administration, the leadership in place to manage those faculty, to help hire them and supervise them and develop and train them. And so faculty development training is another piece there. The items that are with the asterisk indicate that these could kind of go on either side. I think that the ones above are pretty clear cut, but there are some centers for teaching and learning on campuses that can do a good job of both training and developing people to teach in the face-to-face environment, and also teach and train people to work in the online environment. So the division there is kind of arbitrary in some respects, but you get the main picture. So once you get those services that need to be specialized by campus, the third thing in this organizational structure that I think is pretty critical and important is budgeting, separate budgets. The online campus needs to account for its own expenditures and so forth, revenue that comes in from it, and then apportion out the expenses and see what the operating income is at the bottom of the chart there. And you need to separate that from the residential campus so you see how each unit is performing. A budget is probably the basic or key management tool. And so if somebody's in charge of these two different operations, they need to know how the decisions they make are impacting the budget. If they decide to beef up in one area or to reduce in an area, you want to see the impact that is having. And if you put this all together in one budget, you can't track the cause and effect of decisions that you make. So typically you'd have the direct expenses appropriated out in these broad categories that are listed here. You've got the administration, the instructional expenses for the faculty and related costs, the marketing, as we talked about, enrollment management functions and the staff that go into those, IT and help desk on the online campus side, and the equivalent on the residential campus are all the facilities, the residence halls, the cafeterias, the classroom buildings, and the whole residence life system with athletics and so forth going with that. So take those direct expenses and allocate them accordingly. And then those shared services, those things, those departments that really support both operations or both delivery modes, like the library, the financial aid department, or registrar, should be prorated. So if 60% of your student FTE and credit hours are coming from the online campus, they should be charged 60% of the expense for those shared services. And likewise, when you have overhead or central office expenses like the president's office, HR, and so forth, you would prorate those out. And at the end of the day, you get to the bottom line, which is the operating income for both of these units. It's really helpful to break the budgets apart like this and to be able to track the performance of each of these units. There are some campuses and programs that even have a third column here. If schools have a large, extensive offline operation or graduate school where they do face-to-face classes, that could be a third column as appropriate for your particular institution. So budget's pretty important to separate those out and be able to track the costs as well as the revenue that's generated by each of these operations. So the next chart here is kind of an example of two partner institutions that we work with here at the Learning House. You don't need to know which institutions these are, but they illustrate very well, in my estimation, the difference between thinking about investing in online programs versus viewing them as an expense to the budget. The institution on the left is a faith-based institution. is 40 miles from a major metropolitan area. So is School B. It's the same metropolitan area, just 40 miles in a different direction. School B actually partnered with Learning House earlier, back in '07. They began developing online programs, where School A was a couple years later getting to the table. One of the main differences, though, that you see here is that when School A started, they hired a full-time leader whose responsibility was to develop and manage the online programs. They also gave this individual a separate marketing budget. Today, that institution has 5 full-time employees in the online division, primarily marketing, enrollment management counselors, and academic advisors, as I mentioned on one of the previous slides. The other institution took a faculty member and gave him an overload assignment to manage and develop online programs. No budget to go with that, and today that person is still a part-time person managing the online programs. And you can see what the enrollments are for these 2 programs. School A has 6 fully online degrees, a couple of master's degrees and several bachelor's degrees. School B is just getting ready to launch this January their first fully online degree. So these are not definitive, but they're examples of what happens when an institution decides to develop online programs and they view it as an expense. And they typically say, well, we're going to assign this to somebody else. We're going to see how it goes. If it works and if it makes money, then we'll be able to hire some other people and we'll have the revenue to do that. So they try to, in a sense, pay the way for the program out of the proceeds that come. If an institution is really serious about this, they've done their homework and believe that online fits their mission and is appropriate for their marketplace, that there's an opportunity there, investing in the right leadership and the right support systems and budgets will make a big difference. School B may never get enough money to actually do what they want to do at the rate that they're going. Think, too, about the impact here. Typical school may charge $330 a credit hour, so maybe $1,000 for 3-credit course in revenue. And when we say a current online enrollment, in this particular case, we mean one student taking one class. So these are actual classes when we say an enrollment. So 2,760 seats in classes, if those students paid an average of $1,000 or $330 a credit hour, School A this year will take in about $2.7 million in their online programs, or they have to date. That gives you significant resources to invest back into the program and to help it grow. So even if the school had to borrow a couple $100,000 to get started and get up and running, look what's happened. They've clearly paid that money back in a sense to the general fund or the endowment fund or whatever, and they've generated a nice income for the institution. So it's really helpful to think about investing, and if you believe in the program, if it's worth doing, I think it's worth investing in. So if you do go the route of School A and you make the investment, you build a good program with leadership and support services and its own staff and programs and so forth, chances are you'll be successful. I think between now and 2020, the next 8 years, there's a great opportunity for public and private nonprofit institutions to build substantial online programs. Even though many of those 60 million adults went to a for-profit institution, there's many of them still out there that decided that wasn't for them and are looking for a place to get a degree and need an opportunity to advance professionally. So the question becomes, though, think about it, just the editorial pause here for me. Where will you be in 2020 if you build a program that generates $3 or $4 million a year? And because what's going to happen, I believe, is that this market will close down or get crowded, just like the national market has for the for-profits. And When that time comes, some of your competitors will start to cut their prices. Some of them will have maybe strong reputations and be able to keep enrolling students. But when the competition gets really tight and the land gets all claimed and it becomes crowded, it may be much more difficult to maintain those levels of revenue. You see again the pain that's going on in the for-profit sector as they're reducing staff and cutting back. University of Phoenix just announced yesterday they're closing 111 sites around the country and laying off 800 people. So that could be you in 2020, depending on how you use those proceeds. And so my cautionary voice is be careful about what you do with those proceeds. If you use that revenue and that operating income solely to support a campus program that's losing money and not sustaining itself, you're going to come to a point, I think, about 8 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, when that revenue's maybe not going to be as robust. So I would encourage people to think about investing those funds, again, kind of a different way. Investing those in sustainability for the institution. If nothing else, that could be building your endowment rather than devoting those funds to operating income. If they were placed into the endowment, then it will be a long-term perpetual source of revenue for the institution. Or even better yet, think about ways of restructuring and changing the institution, the culture, and the style of the institution so it's more self-sustaining without kind of this, what I think of as a windfall in the online environment for those who get there first. Anyway, a word of caution. So that's the part of the presentation about the structure, the organizational arrangements that you put together to really develop and grow online programs. We're going to turn now in the last half of the webinar to governance issues. We'll talk first about governance in terms of the traditional sense of committees and councils on campus and the way people get involved in making decisions. We'll also talk about some key policies in this section of the webinar that are particularly important for online programs. So I want you to think about how you'll adopt these policies for your institution to accommodate online learners. And then we'll end with a couple of points about federal regulation and particular impact for online programs. So governance in this case is the whole broader sense of how we make decisions and govern our institutions, especially where online is concerned. So the number one issue for governance is what's the role of the faculty in these online programs. And it's no different in a sense than the role of the faculty in the traditional programs back at campus. The key concept here is that the faculty are responsible for the curriculum. They're the subject matter experts. They need to decide what are the appropriate outcomes, the appropriate courses, the structure of the degree plans. All aspects of the curriculum are the key area where the faculty needs to make decisions and have authority. Where and when those programs are delivered, however, is not necessarily a faculty decision. I think it's an administrative decision. And faculty members can create the programs, design the courses, select the outcomes. But then it shouldn't be their prerogative or their authority to decide whether or not that particular course or that program is going to be delivered online or off campus or in some other blended format. Oftentimes, the institutions that we work with, faculty think that they own the course or they own the program. They designed this course, so it's their course, and they can decide whether or not that course will be offered in an online format. So I think it's a critical decision point that every institution has to come to in regard to faculty governance and involvement, where it starts and where it ends. And I think it ends with the curriculum, and it's an administrative decision then, as I say here, where and when. When you think about this, this actually makes it easier in many regards, because a number of institutions kind of keep fighting this battle over whether or not online is as good as or better than traditional face-to-face classes. And they spend time trying to convince faculty members. You can spend a lot of time and energy and resource in trying to change the mind of a faculty member. when I think it's kind of wasted effort. These people were hired to teach in a face-to-face environment. They may be very good at what they do. So you don't need to convert them. You don't need to change their mind. You don't need to make them great online teachers. Some people are great in the classroom. Some people are great online, and they're not necessarily crossover, not good at both. So when you make this separation between designing and building the curriculum and where to deliver it, you're free to go out and hire faculty members that want to teach online, that think it's great, that are good at it, that like it. And when you make that division, it becomes much easier to build and develop your online programs. And you don't have to try to push faculty members into places where they feel uncomfortable or unprepared or are hesitant. So with that in mind, let's look at a similar chart to the one before about the kind of governance structures that we need. Now, I've looked at a lot of governance structures from different institutions, colleges and universities, and they're all very different. They typically have some common elements and then a lot of variety. So keep in mind that these are just suggestions, that every college or university does it a little bit differently, but using good judgment, you can kind of decide fairly easily, I think, which committees need to be replicated or which councils need to be one for online, one for traditional face-to-face, and which committees or governance structures, councils, committees could be joint at the university level. So clearly on the joint side, the curriculum committee is important. Whether this is part of a faculty senate's responsibility or a separate faculty committee on curriculum, it's a key university function, and it needs to have representatives from both the online faculty and the traditional on-campus or face-to-face faculty. And along with curriculum comes issues like assessment, faculty qualifications, perhaps even admission standards. Those are all wrapped up, in my mind, in the area of curriculum or program where joint faculty need to have responsibility in one university-wide committee because it's the same degree, as we said earlier, just offered in different ways. Promotion and tenure would typically be at the university level. Most academic policy is decided in a place like a dean's council or an academic council. And again, I think that same policies would typically apply across the university, but there may be nuances where you have one version for online and another version for on-ground. If you have faculty committees in your structure that support and give advice to areas like financial aid, the library, and academic support centers, those would typically be, again, just like the parallel structure at the university level. And then on the campus-specific side, again, there's often faculty advisory groups or committees with faculty and staff that give advice to the Faculty Development Center on issues like faculty load and compensation, marketing, enrollment management. Those, again, should be specific to the type of delivery system that's being used. It's kind of common sense here to think about how you would divide those out and how you would involve faculty and staff in governance bodies that either make decisions or give advice to these various departments and functions. So, good broad overview of how you may separate your governance function to support both types of delivery systems or both campuses. We're going to shift now and talk about some policies. There's about half a dozen key policies that are really important for online students, and I want to share with you some of the nuances about this. First of all, though, leading into this is another slide from that market research study that we did. The name of that study, by the way, is Online College Students 2012. And if you'd like to see the full report, it's available free of charge. You can just go to the Learning House website and download a copy from there. One of the questions was, how many transfer credits did you have that you brought with you when you enrolled in your fully online degree? And it's kind of remarkable that only 18% of these students were brand new. The bottom line there, where they had 0 transfer credit. Over half of these students had, or about half of these students had more than 30 transfer credits, over a year's worth of work to bring in. So these are students that oftentimes have tried different colleges and universities. They frequently have credits from 3 or 4 different places where they've tried, haven't finished, maybe they did a certificate, and now they're ready to go and put it all together for a fully online degree. So obviously one of the policies or set of policies you need to have in place are those that accommodate students with transfer credit. And there's more to this issue than meets the eye. There's a lot of ways that you can accommodate students with transfer credit. First one is even pushes the realm of credit itself into experiential credit. These adult students, they're typically older students, have a life experience that oftentimes is equivalent to classwork or college credit. There's a great organization called CALE, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, that's very reputable. And CALE just launched, they're the ones that wrote the standards on experiential credit, how to review life experience for credit. And they've trained many professors and worked with a number of universities over the years. But now just recently they started offering a direct service where they'll do portfolio reviews for an institution. So you can sign an agreement with CALE, and any student that wants to submit a portfolio for experiential credit, CALE will review it and decide how much credit it's worth. In fact, they teach a class that your students can enroll in that help them develop their portfolio. So it's a great way to be friendly to these students that have life experience. Got a question here or comment, just a second.
Dave, Tim would like to know the spelling of that CALE organization.
Oh, it's C-A-E-L, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, headquartered in Chicago, C-A-E-L. Next, there's other forms of credit. Credit by examination. People oftentimes take exams in their workplace or in the military or from other sources that could be verification that they know information that's worth college credit. And a related area is credit for non-university education. So oftentimes corporations have training programs or certificates that you can earn, or the military has a number of advanced training programs that are equivalent to college courses. Fortunately, there's a great resource, the American Council on Education's credit program, and that's C-R-E-D-I-T. If you go to the American Council on Education, or ACE website, you can look up the credit program. And it's a great service that ACE runs where they review examinations and they review all kinds of corporate military training programs. They have a process where they send a team of faculty members in and a methodology they go through to review those programs and determine the credit value that they're worth. And those recommendations are all recorded in the credit directory then. It's on the ACE website. And I'd highly recommend that your university adopt a policy that says you'll accept the credit recommendations from ACE. And then any student that's been through any one of those programs can bring the record of it, and your registrar can award credit for those previous learnings or those previous experiences. So a couple other things that you can do internally then to be transfer student friendly. One is to have a minimum residency requirement, and 25% is common. This means that the student has to complete at least 25% of their credits from your university to earn your degree, which the opposite side is they can transfer in up to 75% of their credits. 25% is the minimum that the accrediting bodies will approve, and it's a way to be transfer student friendly because it leaves more room or more opportunity than if a student has amassed a lot of credit somewhere else to bring them in and not have to repeat them. And finally, the most important thing that you can do, regardless of all the above, is to develop degree plans that are not restrictive, that have plenty of electives built into them so people have places to slot those credits in. It doesn't help if you have a 25% residency requirement if there's no place in the degree plan where a student can put those credits. So the old rule of thumb where a third of the degree is gen ed, a third of the degree is the major, and a third is electives is a good rule of thumb to follow. Many, many universities, though, and departments keep chipping away at that 1/3 elective area and keep adding requirements in the major that take away those kind of flexibility for students in the program. The other thing is when you think about 1/3 of the credits in Gen Ed, 1/3 in the major, and 1/3 elective, that's 40 credits in a typical 120 credit bachelor's degree. Even within the Gen Ed area, there should be electives. So 40 credits in Gen Ed, maybe 20 of those are specific courses that you have to take, and 20 where you have a choice, where you can take a bunch of different courses. Same thing within the major. If you have 40 credits in the major, then maybe 20 of those, 6 or 7 courses are required courses that everybody in that major has to take, and the other ones are electives where a student can emphasize a certain area or develop a concentration. So developing degree plans that have that level of electives, both within Gen Ed and the major and just general electives, is really, really helpful for these adult students that bring lots of transfer credit or are able to get experiential or credit by exam. So a lot there on transfer students, but it's a big issue, and many times a student that's investigating 2 or 3 universities will make a decision based on the amount of transfer credit that's accepted. And if your university is not very friendly and really restrictive, those students are going to go elsewhere because they don't want to have to repeat and earn that many extra credits to finally put their degree together. So let's go through a couple other policies then that are particularly important for these for online students. Satisfactory academic progress. Part of the reason that you read the headlines that you did the last couple of years about the for-profit universities is because they were aggressive in their recruiting practices and tried to enroll students maybe that weren't ready to go to college. And that got headlines and developed some new regulations in the Department of Ed called gainful employment to help slow that down. But another area where these institutions they could have done a better job is having tighter academic progress standards. It's hard to decide up front if a student who's been out of high school for 15 or 20 years is going to be successful or not. That's really difficult to determine even with a battery of placement tests and other indicators. So if your mission is about access, you tend to want to let those students come and start, but it's important, I think, then to have a strong and a strict academic progress standard that weeds out the students who really aren't capable or aren't motivated or aren't ready at that time in their life to do academic work. So you may admit those students and enroll them. It's hard to predict who's going to be successful, but shorten up and tighten up academic progress standards so they can't stay at the university term after term, failing, building up large student loans that they have to pay back and not being able to finish. So institutions have quite a bit of flexibility in setting their satisfactory academic progress standards or their SAP standards. And the financial aid folks at the U.S. Department of Ed will let you build your own standards. I would advocate that you make those short. Don't give a very long probationary period. If a student is not performing, pull the trigger earlier rather than later. And you can have good appeal procedures for students that really think they can do it and work their way back in. But stretching that out too long does the student a disservice, and it will build your discount rates and create problems for the university down the road. Another good policy is leave of absence. These adult students oftentimes have life events that happen that they have to stop out for a period of time. And you could just say, well, they can stop out and come back when the time comes. It'll be easier and keep them intellectually tied in to grant them a leave of absence with a specific date when they'll return and make it easier for them to make that return, and will help them, encourage them to come back at the appropriate time to re-enroll and re-engage and go finish up. It's very easy for a student who's very busy, has family and jobs and so forth, but once they sit out a term or two, it kind of becomes habit forming. So you want to do everything you can to encourage them to restart, come back, and finish up. Academic dishonesty and student ID in some ways go together. These are areas that that the federal government, the regulatory bodies, the accrediting bodies are all concerned about, and they have, I think, a misguided belief that it's easier to cheat in an online course, or it's easier to commit fraud and have somebody else do work for you. I think it's actually harder, and there's better tools in the online side. But to combat that image or that belief that's out there, it's important to have strong policies on plagiarism, dishonesty, and student ID. And the key thing in the academic dishonesty area is to make sure you have a contract with Turnitin, and more than just a contract where you can run papers through and see if they were plagiarized, have policies and procedures in place where your faculty use Turnitin. Institutions that do this well would require a number of assignments in every class to be run through Turnitin, and the students know then that in every class, major assignments are going to go through Turnitin, so it just doesn't pay to copy and to cheat. The other thing that's important here is to have a central repository where you keep track of every instance or every violation of plagiarism or the dishonesty policy, because normally the punishments escalate. It's pretty common to see a place where first time you get a 0 on the assignment, the second time you plagiarize, you fail the class, the third time you're dismissed from the university. So you have to keep track, and you have to have a central repository where every faculty member submits a case when they discover it, and then they have to know if it's first, second, or third, because it makes a big difference in how you handle it. In the student ID area, there are good third-party vendors now that are building systems that help verify who that student is. There are several companies that use cameras and camera technology or keyboard tracking technology to verify that the student is who they say they are. Axiom is a company that we partner with here at Learning House, and it uses private information from public databases to verify, similar to banking system. It will pose questions to a student that only that student should be able to answer. So you can use it to verify that the student is who they say they are when they take an exam, when they go to class, intermittently throughout their program. There are good ways to give a pretty good handle on student ID. Finally then, let's talk about the academic calendar. It's a key issue because they're typically different for online programs. And here's the standard choices that we see most often, although there are a few variations of this. As you look at these calendars, you can go 16-week terms, the traditional semester. 12 weeks works pretty good. 8 is the most common that we see, and some use 6-week terms. If you look at the number of terms you get a year, then in the second column, they all result in 48 weeks when you're in class and 4 weeks out of class. This kind of nice even number. You're efficient in terms of using most of the weeks in the calendar, but giving 4 weeks off throughout the academic year. So they're all multiples, or they all get up to 48 in some combination. If you're taking 16-week, the longer terms, you may take more than one course. So 2 courses or half-time student load is pretty common if you have 16-week terms, and you can see the variations there. Part of the issue is that adult students, older students, want to go through quickly. They don't want to languish forever getting their degree. Once they decide to go, it's important that they can finish in a reasonable time. So you have this blend of how much time it takes to complete a course, how many credits they earn overall. So with these standards, you can see that you get anywhere from 18 to 24 credits per year. Students are going to want to push towards the 24. The problem is that they need to spend so much time in class for every credit earned. And the final column shows you for each of these scenarios what would be the expected amount of time a student would spend per week to earn that credit. And when you get up to 20 hours per week on top of a full-time job and a family, you're getting to the upper limits of what most online students can do. Now, some students don't work full-time. They want to go to school full-time, so they could take on more and maybe take a full load. But you need to make a calendar decision based on all these factors in combination. 8-week terms is kind of the standard that's out there in most of the industry, and it works pretty well for these adult students. They can take one course at a time, focus on that course, and still make reasonable progress towards graduation. The ones that have more time or are able to devote it can take more than one course every 8 weeks too and advance quicker. This next slide shows you how you do the calculation. And we're getting into now a couple of federal regulations that I think are important as part of the overall governance and administration of online programs. This is the formula that the U.S. Department of Ed uses to define a Carnegie unit. And they say for your programs, your classes, whether they're face-to-face or online, they should meet this standard to earn the credit that they're earning, and that the U.S. Department of Ed is giving out Title IV funds for. So most places use a 50-minute hour, although it says 1 hour in the regulation. Some places even kind of fudge down on the 2 hours of homework and say that's really 2 50-minute periods. This calculation uses the full 60 minutes. So in essence, for every credit that you're awarding to a student, they should spend 37.5 hours in their online work. And you can go back and figure out the various combinations then of how many credits you offer in the weeks in the term to see how much time a student should spend per week. So again, the 8-week courses with one course every 8 weeks for 3 credits, student's going to have to spend around 20 hours a week to earn that credit. So it's important to keep this in mind. The accrediting bodies are now all charged with developing standards around this and applying those standards when they come to evaluate your institution. So at some point you're going to have to explain how you award the credit you do. And there's 2 variations that most places are following on this. They actually track the hours that their online students spend. You can ask the students or you could observe them, and they develop standards then when you build an online course that certain activities are worth so many hours, so you have to have enough activities in the course to get the student hours up to the appropriate level. And the other way is to, if you have the online version of a ground class, is to take the ground class that meets for 15 weeks, 3 hours a week, and make sure that the online class is equivalent. And you have to, I think at that point you should document whether the outcomes in the online class are the same as the outcomes in the face-to-face class. Keep in mind, though, that most of the data that's out there, there's not a lot, shows that the on-ground classes, students are not spending as much time as they should to equal a full Carnegie unit. The National Survey of Student Engagement, NSSE, has a question about how much time students spend in outside of class work, and it averages around 12 hours a week. And if you're a full-time student, that's about half what you should be spending. So the online or the on-ground classes, it looks like, in many cases, are not meeting the Carnegie unit either. Okay, last question then is, in the federal level, is this question about state regulation. And if you're going to go online, you have to meet the requirements of every state that your students are in. And this is a general list that shows you which states are very restrictive, which are very open, and everybody else in the middle. So not real helpful, but the most useful resource I could direct you to is on this next slide. The state higher education executive officers have an organization called SHEO, and they've done surveys of all their members and have a directory on their website that lists the requirements, the fees, the regulatory issues for all 50 states. So it's a good resource. If you have students in 10 different states, you can go to this site and find out exactly what those states require and what the processes are to get licensed or to comply with their state regulations. So it's a helpful background. So we're at the end of our hour, and the question is, where are you going to be in the rush? What kind of vehicle are you going to ride? You're going to be the guy on the big wheel bike that's bouncing along, or have a nice wagon with a team of horses pulling you? What kind of organizational structure are you going to put in place in the governance system to go with it that will enable you to kind of get your share of the pie, build your online programs? And I hope that the information I shared here has been helpful for you. This webinar will be recorded. You can view it and share it with other people. And we will be publishing a white paper here sometime in the near future on this same topic, where I'll cover most of the same information if you'd rather read it than listen to somebody like me. So if you want to check off now, we'll say thank you for attending. I'll be here for the next half hour, and if you have questions, feel free to send those in and we'll talk about them. And just a heads up, we'll do another webinar in 2 months. We're going to skip the month of Thanksgiving in November, but we'll be back in December, and we're going to do a webinar then about how to grow your online program, strategies for growth and building enrollment. So we'll look forward to that one. So if you have questions now, fire away. We'll repeat your questions, your comments, and then I'll try to respond appropriately. Several people are asking about the recording, and yeah, it'll be available here in the next day or so. Okay, so here's a question. How does a small-ish university without a lot of free resources deliver online without sacrificing quality? Well, it's a great question, Tim. Back to my one slide about investment versus expenses. I think if you're going to do this, you ought to do it well. You ought to give it the appropriate leadership and invest the money in marketing that will get the students for you. So no matter what size institution, I think that if you're going to do online programs, you ought to set aside the money to invest in a good leader that has the right skill set and credentials to head up these online programs, and a minimum of marketing budget for that person to use to help start recruiting these. And then there's probably some dedicated staff or parts of staff members that go with this to support the online programs. If they grow at a reasonable pace, you'll have good resources coming in to, in a sense, kind of pay back that initial investment and to hire the staff that you need. So there's difference. Every institution is a little bit different. You know, whether you have funds and carryover funds that are left over, whether you reapportion some funds from other lines in the budget to support this. If you just dabble in this and do a little bit kind of part-time, you'll never get very big, or it'll take a long, long time to do that. So it's kind of a chicken and egg question. Yeah, go ahead, Emily. Share the question.
Eric would like to know, what companies do you recommend for student identification?
Well, again, we've partnered here at Learning House, so we have kind of an interest in Axiom. But before I joined Learning House, I did a fairly exhaustive study of different companies. There's half a dozen companies out there, most of whom use cameras and camera technology to track the students. Axiom was far and away the one that was most widely used in higher ed, and it's a very tested system that works. A number of universities have used it. It's very prominent in the banking and financial services industry, where they'll ask unique questions just for you that you have to answer. So they can verify who you are as a student every time you enroll or log into your class, or every time you take an exam. You can set the Axiom system to query a student as often as you want. It can be intermittent and random, or it can be every time they log on, like I said. So, and if a student doesn't get the question right, it locks them out from going further, and they may have to investigate. I've actually been through this a few times, and there's some questions I can't remember, like where did you live when you were in 1962 or something, and I forget where I lived then. It'll give you a multiple choice question where you have to answer the right answer. And so you get a couple tries before they kick you out. But it's a pretty effective system, fairly inexpensive, and it works pretty well. The camera technologies get more expensive for the student, and more expensive because somebody has to monitor the camera from the other end during tests and things like that.
Phil has a question. To what extent do online program managers and directors have approval authority over adjunct faculty? In short, who has the last say, academics or staff?
Well, I think it should be the academic leader of the online programs. So I don't think that the traditional faculty chairs and leaders on the campus program need to make that decision. They need to set the standard. Like, it requires a PhD in this field to teach this class, or a master's degree to teach this class. Once those requirements are set, then the academic leaders of the online program should be making those decisions and hiring the faculty that will do well and supervising those faculty. So when I say that hire a leader that has appropriate academic credentials, like equivalent to an associate provost, as they build the programs too, you'll hire coordinators with degrees in the field. So if you offer a bachelor's degree in business online, you need to have a coordinator who's a faculty member or faculty leader in business, and they should make those decisions. So as you build the infrastructure, you build academic leadership right along with the faculty for the online programs. And it's kind of a parallel structure. You may have a division chair on campus that has faculty that teach business. You may also have a coordinator or a chairperson online who supervises the faculty that teach the online courses.
And then in a related question, Nicholas wanted to know, did you have any suggestions on how to manage the faculty politics associated with increasing online programs at traditional liberal arts and politics?
Yeah, Nick, the hardest question there is that big one I pointed to earlier, where you have to come to terms with the fact that the faculty own the curriculum. They're the arbiters and have authority over deciding what goes into that curriculum. But they shouldn't have authority and decision-making responsibility over whether or not you teach that curriculum online. That, to me, is an administrative decision. And every institution is different in how you get to that point where faculty understand that and accept that. It may be little battles one at a time until you get the consensus on that, or it may just be that the president or the provost says, here's how we're going to do it, you know. But it's clear from AAUP and other organizations, the accrediting bodies, that the faculty should have responsibility for that curriculum. But it's pretty hard for a faculty member to make a case that they're going to decide you can't teach that class or that program online. So, and also I think it helps if you go to this idea that you don't have to teach online. We're not going to force you to teach these online classes. We're going to hire other people with the appropriate credentials to teach those online classes, but we're not going to force you into doing this. I think if you get away from the idea that everybody has to do it, it's an easier proposition. But I understand the issues. Every institution has those.
Eileen would like to know, how have universities grown enrollment outside of the state or area where they have campuses?
Two answers to that question. I think it kind of depends on where your institution is. Some institutions are right on the border, so they have natural attractions, and they just advertise. Most of the students will come from where you do your marketing. And if you buy leads from a lead aggregator and buy them from all over the country, you may enroll students from other places. But it really follows your marketing. Where you market, where your institution has a natural attraction, or natural following, alumni base, you'll get students. The other case is that we have some partner institutions that have very unique degrees. Again, the online college student 2012 study that we did, we list the top 10 degrees that students want to study, and fully a third of them are in the business area. That's the most common, the most frequent one. So almost every institution that does online programs does a business degree, followed closely by fields like nursing, psychology, criminal justice, information technology. It's mostly the professional fields because people are coming back to school to advance in their profession. So most universities, if you look across the board, offer those degrees. Those are the kind of degrees they offer online. And there's a market for almost all those degrees anywhere in the country, so that they're successful and they work pretty well no matter what locale you're in. But there are a few institutions then that have unique degrees. We have a partner that's a long-term partner, Learning House, has a bachelor's degree in mining. And there aren't very many places that offer that degree, so they would tend to get students from around the country. Another one I can think of is we have a new partner that's just beginning to launch a bachelor's degree in sign language. They have a specialty in this field. It's needed by people all over the country. they'll naturally develop kind of a national clientele for that program because it's just not very common. It's not offered very many places. So that's the other way that you would tend to get a broader audience besides how you advertise and where you try to recruit students from. Yeah, there's another answer to that question, I guess. I remember a couple conversations with institutions that we work with that have large concentrations of alumni in another part of the country. People tend to gravitate to maybe another city, a couple states over or something. That may be a natural draw. As an institution, if you have a strong bachelor's program, this is actually some of the stuff I'm going to talk about at the webinar in December. If you have a strong bachelor's program where you've graduated a lot of students, that's a natural strategy then, or a natural growth area, to add a master's degree in that same field and advertise it to your alumni that are out there. And if your alumni have all moved to another city or you have a large concentration of them, you may pick up a number of enrollments then from that state or that location for a master's degree, because students oftentimes are attracted to go back to their alma mater to pick up the graduate degree. Yeah, another question? Message board's silent right now. Anybody else have a topic you want to talk about or an issue that you'd like to raise? Take a few minutes and think about it. Well, it looks like we've worked our way through the questions and comments that were coming in.
One last question.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Emily.
Nick says that some people in the audience may be interested in hearing the work you have done on the assessment of student learning and online and face-to-face.
Thanks, Nick. I did a webinar 2 months ago. It's on the site about assessment, and we're building some tools at Learning House to help our partner institutions directly assess student learning at the course level and see how well they achieve course outcomes. And it's kind of exciting work because when you develop online programs and courses, you often tend to go to a master course philosophy where you standardize the course. And if you keep the outcomes constant over time and decide how you're going to assess those outcomes, you can actually track student performance and course performance term over term over term and see how well that course is working. You can make changes in the course itself then, and if you keep the outcomes and the assessments in place, you can see if the changes made a difference and if things got better. So we have a number of partner institutions that we're working with now to kind of pilot this system, and other partners can use it later. With some of these schools, they've also gone a step further, and if they have an outcome in an online course, it's the same outcome in the face-to-face course, and they've elected to use the same assessment or assignment in both versions of the course. That way we can compare the results and see if the online students do better or worse than the face-to-face campus-based students in the same course with the same assessment, assignment, rubric, or exam in place. We're actually finishing a study in the next couple of weeks with Barry University from Florida, and we'll be presenting the results of that study at a UPCEA conference coming up in November. The UPCEA is the University, I think it's about the Continuing Education Association. So these are departments of continuing ed at universities. So we'll probably post that paper, in partnership with Barry University when we get the data finally analyzed and presented here. I think that wraps it up for today, everyone. Really appreciate your questions, appreciate your attention, and We'll look forward to seeing you at a future webinar here with the Learning House. Take care and have a great day.